I am very, very happy, very excited to introduce Karen Kelly, co-founder and editor at Dancing Foxes Press. I first learned of Karen's work a few years ago when she worked closely with my good friend Andrea Geyer to publish an incredible monograph, Dance in a Future with All Present, that brought together essays and images of Andrea's work and was organized incredibly independently of an exhibition, which I know is a question that has come up for a few folks in the chat. So I was just so blown away by the by this incredible book. And lately we had a chance to connect in other ways, and we've intersected in several different ways over the years. Karen has acted as a consultant with Creative Capital and has been supportive to many artists who are interested in exploring avenues for publishing in that way. I learned after the sort of introduction through Andrea's book that she's behind many of my favorite monographs, catalogs, and artist book collections. So many incredible books. I had actually the privilege of contributing to a book that she published last year or edited last year. Theater Refusal, that was published in 2024. Karen has so many years of incredible experience in art book publishing. She, from 1989 to 2011, she actually directed the publishing program at Dia Art Foundation. Then later she founded Dancing Foxes Press with Barbara Schroeder in 2012. So if you're not yet familiar with Dancing Foxes Press, we'll put a link in the chat, but it's an incredible publisher, led fearlessly and visionarily by Barbara and Karen, and they create these just really incredible publications. Recent ones include God Made My Face, a collective portrait of James Baldwin, which is absolutely beautiful. Dance Histories, Imagination is a Form of Study, which I know some folks at Lewis Place contributed to, and which is just such an incredible collection. And the aforementioned Theater of Refusal, Black Art and Mainstream Criticism, which is also an incredible book. So it is such a privilege and an honor to have Karen here to speak specifically about art book publishing. We're so grateful. Thank you so much, Karen. Oh, you're muted.
I'm not able to, oh, there we go. You can hear me, yeah? Thank you, Stephanie. It's amazing to be here with you, and thanks to everybody at Lewis Place, particularly Naima and Genevieve as well. Um, it's so lovely, I have to say, to be in the company of such great other speakers, and it's so I think you'll all learn so much this weekend, including me. Um, so thank you very much for doing this. So Stephanie asked me if I would walk you through some steps of publishing. Of course, I'll do this really from my own experience, both at Dancing Foxes, a little bit at Dia as well, and my own point of view. I'll try to go outside that a little bit, but generally, my examples are going to be coming primarily from Dancing Fox's titles. Um, but before that, to give you a sense of like where I started from, I initially started getting into this world of art book publishing, um, working for a limited edition print and book publisher. Um, a literary journal, an international art journal, as well as a Center for Book Arts, sometimes all at the same time. So then I worked, as Stephanie said, for more than 20 years as publisher at and editor at Dia Art Foundation. Um, Before I started Dancing Foxes with my Dia colleague, Barbara Schroeder, and friend. Um, To give you a little background on Dancing Foxes and why we started it through the support and encouragement, or actually of a lot of artists who we had worked with, both at DIA and um, who we knew, and so we really listened to them and what they wanted from an art book publisher, from a publisher. Um, we wanted Dancing Foxes to take a really collaborative approach that really relied on dialogue and above all trust and trusting the artist, trusting the other collaborators, and kind of trying to create a sense of trust through dialogue, and keeping the eye on the ball, and in that we wanted to really focus in on the book itself and the work of the book itself, and found that in doing that we could really kind of like everybody asks us, who makes the decisions? And it's not really a question very often that comes up for us because we talk until we find a decision that everybody, all the collaborators involved, is really happy with, and that's really where we start, and that's about trust and building trust. So we wanted to work with artists, curators, writers, scholars, designers, as well as printers and binders. And we wanted input from all of those collaborators. We didn't want to be a publisher that published without those ideas and expertise from everyone involved. Um, that's our goal, at least. We're small and we're independent. And we publish about 5 to 7 pretty substantial books a year, many in collaboration with institutions, and museums, some smaller arts institutions. So the way I am going to do this is I'm going to share my screen. This is just a little group of our books, Dancing Foxes books. Um, but I'm going to walk through the process, our process, and perhaps your process through a series of questions. And the first is why? Why publish this book? And what is the pretext for making this book? Make the argument for making this book, because not all books should be made. Secondly, every book, well, but I do want to say every book does have its reason for being, and I think it's really important to think about it first, why? Because a lot of resources go into it, a lot of work goes into it, and books are really hard. They're hard to make. So I'm going to just give you some of the reasons for being of books that we've published. And I'm going to start with Patty Chang's book, The Wandering Lake. Um, Patty worked on her Wandering Lake project for about 8 years. It was super expansive. It included years and years of research and many individual works and video, performance, written scripts and texts, photography, and installation. And our charge was to really bring together all of this information together that didn't just consolidate them as pictures of work, but really narrativized them. Because Patty was telling a story with this project, and we she came to us actually saying, I know this should be a book. Should be a book, but I have no idea how it should be a book and what it should be, what it should look like. And she sort of just gave us a lot of images, a lot of text. And so we came up with we needed to find a way to make a narrative um, that was true to the project. And one of the things that Patty did was she wrote and spoke and performed in a lot of different voices. Some of these were really personal, and some of these were more like travelogues. She, so we needed to find a way to both tie them all together, but respect that voice, respect all of those voices. So, um, and integrate some of, obviously here, some of the images that she produced during this journey, this 8-year journey. Um, so that's sort of where we started and why we started with Patty, because she knew it needed to be a book and knew it needed to be condensed. And it's actually quite a condensed book. It's small. It's hand. You can really hold it in your hands, and so that was its intention. And we worked also with the Queen's Museum, and so the book actually ended up in the Queen's Museum exhibition and became a work in itself. Um, Here are two other books of ours. A.K. Burns on the left. She planned from the very beginning that a book would be part of her 10-year project, and she recognized that her multi-part suite of video installations had a backstory and theoretical substrate that really needed to be told. And she wanted to make that public and make that part of, make it visible to her audience. So it was really important for her to decode the references because in the video installations themselves, it was sometimes kind of mystifying intentionally. So that was important to her. Um, Moira Davies' book on the right actually was an integral part of the of an exhibition that also included a film and a series of photographs. And I'll talk about that project a little bit more later. Um, we're now working on a monographic overview with a conceptual artist who's really struggled to show the threads between her works. They don't look alike. So she really wants those threads to be revealed and we will try to do that in her book through interpretive and critical text alongside images and timelines, to sort of show how one work might evolve into another or to show those through lines. Um, Books are also really important institutions for lots of reasons. One being their capacity for documentation and distribution and leaving physical traces of museum activities, for example. Um, some books are even planned to be used within a show. This series of images is the first one is Prem Krishnamurthy, who was the designer of a project that we did for the Carnegie International, the 57th Carnegie International. So this book, we really thought about how it will be used in the exhibition as a guide through the exhibition and allow for less interpretive material to be there in the gallery. Um, so then the first question I guess I would ask of an artist is to walk them through, to walk artists through this process, is to ask if you need a publisher or do you have one on board already, maybe an institutional publisher. But if you need one, and Stephanie and Rachel have gone through a lot of this, so I'm going to be repeating some information, but it's really helpful to help to think through a project conceptually and practically by writing a book proposal. It's not only just for the publisher or to think about, but it's also for you to really think through what makes your book. Obviously, the contents are important, so a synopsis and preface of the book would be important and the argument of its relevance, its why, then whether there are authors, how many images do you imagine? How big do you see the book in terms of its trim size or its page count? Do you have a designer? Do you have an illustrator? Who's the audience for your book? Are there other books that might compare to your book in terms of its audience? And would any of the writers bring different audience, like writers or other collaborators that you bring on, could they bring different audiences to it as well? Um, if you've made other books, how does this book differ? One thing I would say is one example I have of this is we're working right now with a museum, a small museum, and working on a book with an artist who actually has a lot of few books out that are available. And we really found it important to make the book um, very different and bring out a whole new aspect of this artist's work than has been brought out in his previous books. So we've been working really hard with him to do that. He was very enthusiastic about the ideas of it. So that's one thing to be thinking about. Another thing, and this is Rachel and Stephanie mentioned this, that a book might appeal to a scholarly audience and therefore perhaps a be course adopted. That's really great. And you would work with a publisher and distributor in order to do that. So next, I would say, what do you expect or need from a publisher? This is a really important question because before you correspond with a publisher, you probably want to know something about them in terms of something about them and also forthcoming about where you are in the process of developing your book. Um, Different publishers develop their lists really differently. Um, Dancing Foxes, for example, is very editorially driven and invested in a collaborative process. So we really like to consider a book from its earliest stages. But other publishers are more focused on design and production. Um, so they could perhaps take on books in a later stage and in the work. Other and still others take a more hands-off approach in terms of the book's content and focus more on a distribution model. Um, so it's good to just get a sense of a publisher's list or priorities before approaching them. And it'll help you design your proposal also much more specifically for them. And to do that, I I would encourage going to book fairs. That's where you really have a real one-on-one with, you can have a real one-on-one conversation with publishers or there in the space in front of their books and look through their books. So that's a really great way. Um, Another way is, of course, to look on their websites. This is a page that you'll find from my website, for example, which does describe our sort of methodology and our interests. Uh, in addition, you'll see all of our titles there, so you might want to think about how our titles might resonate with your project. Um, Maybe you already have a publisher by way of a publishing institution or a museum, and you're doing your project alongside an exhibition. Um, Museums really vary in terms of their publishing programs and departments. Some departments are really robust, some are non-existent. Some departments work very closely and collaboratively with the curatorial departments. Some don't, actually. It's surprising. But since Dancing Foxes often works very often with smaller institutions without publishing apparatus, so we typically work very closely with curators and artists. Sometimes first curators and then artists. We get brought into a process from different through different avenues, actually. Museums and institutions also really vary in the degree of input they give an artist. They in the process of making a book. So that's something to be aware of. If you do have some input and your book is tied to an an exhibition, for example, then you might really consider the relationship between the book and the exhibition. Is it an exhibition catalog? And if so, is it important to you or to the institution that the book would be available for the exhibition's opening or during the exhibition's run, which really does put a constraint to some degree. It's good. It can be very good, and it can put constraints on your book. When I was personally working in an institution, I was really interested in exploring and opening up that space between what a book does and what an exhibition couldn't do. And also recognizing the opposite, what an exhibition does that a book doesn't. So that's always an interesting question when, for example, the institution you're working with has wants to have exhibition shots, exhibition views in their books in order to document this activity of making the exhibition. So that happens more often than it did when I began this journey. Some books are tasked with documenting the exhibition, and so I really like to think about what makes that interesting because exhibition views can be really deadly, actually. Um, so thinking about that, here's an example of Liz Lerner, a book we did with Liz Lerner, Don't Put It Back Like It Was. And it was published with the Sculpture Center, and we really wanted to take advantage of the juxtapositions that the book that the exhibition brought forward, the juxtapositions and works. So we tasked a photographer to make that her focus. And so it was a really true merge of artist interest, in this case, curatorial intent, photographer's observation, and editorial vision. Um, so uh next, this is another view of Liz's book. Okay, getting to the budget, because this is always very important. And first I want to maybe talk about the components of a budget. So here you'll see a sort of a line items of what might go into a budget. This is one of our templates actually. So you'll see, um, yeah, all these different, which also represents stages of book publishing as well. Your book proposal will come in handy as you do this because you've already gotten a sense of what's in the book, how big it is, how many images you have, and the kinds of expertise you'll need to make it, whether authors, designers, editors. You may need help building this out in some areas, obviously, such as printing and pre-press, working with designers to figure those numbers out. If the budget's fixed, then that will to some degree dictate what you do, but keep in mind that things can shift and significantly change your line items if one thing becomes more important than another in the process of making a book. For example, your choice of paper will affect not just how your images look on a page, but also how expensive your book is to print, obviously. So paper. Um, Also, it's really one thing also to remember that if you're using or reproducing or reprinting copyrighted material, you'll need permission to do that, and that could be a chunk of your budget. I'm going to show you this project that we did with Nick Mouse in the Whitney Museum. Um, it was based on an exhibition project. It came out afterwards, but it was based initially on an exhibition project that reconsidered modernism through Nick's digging into the archives to find other, underexamined interrelationships and collaborations of mid-century art forms, particularly ballet and visual art. Um, along with queer culture of the mid-century. Nick really had lengthy conversations with photographers and other rights holders in the book um, in order to reproduce the materials in as least costly a way as possible. And that was through really direct conversations with those right holders. Um, and I just wanted to bring this part of his book up because there were in the exhibition, there were a series of dance every day there was dancing in the exhibition. So, in reproducing the images of the dancers, there's something called personality rights, and you want to make sure that you get permission also from the dancers just to show their images or whoever you're showing within the pages of your book. Um, so the next thing is how will your book will be funded? How are you going to fund this budget that you've made? Um, The funding for a book is typically worked out for the full production of a book before it begins, and books can be funded in so many different ways. Some books will be funded as fixed budgets as part of larger exhibition or institutional budgets, and you may or may not be able to augment them in cases where your vision is more costly or even cheaper, possibly than theirs. It's not at all unusual also for at least some of the funds to be raised by an artist if no institution, especially if there's no institutional funding available. So this can be done in a number of ways. One is through grants. This is an example of a this project this that we did recently, a series of dance histories with Big Dance Theater. Um, other examples of grants that have aided artists that we've worked at with include Creative Capital grants, Guggenheim grants, Terra Foundation grants, MacArthur Foundation grants. Furthermore, J.M. Kaplan Fund, College Art Association, Magnum Foundation, Warhol Foundation, Anonymous was a woman. So there are grants out there. They are usually going to go toward an artist before they're going to go toward a publisher. A few, like Furthermore, do fund publishers. Um, Another one, and I that it is has been very helpful, is if you teach and are on the faculty of a university, there are grants available through university departments or other university avenues. Sometimes maybe they'll be earmarked for um, things like reproduction permissions, or there have been various kinds of earmarked fundings that we've gotten through that avenue. Another important art book funder is commercial galleries. Often galleries are willing to contribute and invest in their artist books and their artists through books. Books, after all, are a great tool for galleries. They bring visibility to your work, and they're a transportable way of moving your work around. Another way to approach this with a gallery or even with other sales venues is through pre-sales. If you know your gallery will want to have a number of books on hand, it's really a good thing to ask them if they won't fund it directly, then if they might buy some on pre-sale, because that can go straight into your book budget. Another possibility working is making a special edition or a print edition, a multiple edition, whose net sales could go toward the production of the book. Some artists, publishers, and institutions rely heavily on this model of fundraising. But I have to note some caution there because it is a job to sell those multiples, and it's a very specialized audience for those multiples. So that that's an expertise in itself. Um, this is a picture here of artist Lady Churchman and master printer Marina Ancona from 10 Grain Press. I should say this is not how Lighty's book was funded, but I like the picture. And we did use the prints that they made for the cover of Lighty's book and the interior title pages. There's working on the cover, actually. Um, what is your timetable? Um, This was our fastest publication. It was stemmed from an event that Zoe Leonard organized that took place the night before the election in 2016. And we endeavored successfully to have it made for the inauguration in January. So it was like it was it, we didn't expect to be doing it, and then we did it really quick. So yeah, and it was taken to Washington and distributed there for $5. So here's things to think about when you're building your schedule. Of course, all books are really different, but one thing that really takes a lot of time in a schedule is writing. Authors need time, and buffers need to be built into this because it's not always predictable when you're going to get their text. But you should you should build in buffers. It's also really important when commissioning writers for us to recognize there are other obligations, such as teaching schedules and things like that. So we try to really give scholars in particular a lot of time for writing, um, a year if we have it. And it also obviously depends on how long and what kind of research we're expecting them to do. Um, uh, Established, if you're working with a publisher, keep in mind that also, and Stephanie and Rachel mentioned this, the publishers also work with distributors, and um, there are deadlines, seasonal deadlines that accompany and the announcement of books, and whether it's through catalogs and sales conferences, but those are something to recognize and reckon with. Um, so who is needed to make up your team of collaborators? Do I really need an editor? This is my favorite question. As an editor, I really do try to emphasize the importance of this particular collaborator. Here, I give you Nabokov's annotations on Kafka's Metamorphosis. Um, and that I also want to say that there are different stages of editing, different kinds of editor. There will be perhaps a managing editor who will really shepherd your project through all of its stages. A general or conceptual editor can really help you define and shape the book, define the shape of your book from the outset. And maybe think through with you questions like finding the right balance between texts and images, or helping you to invite exactly the right writers that really match your intention, and talking through those things, and also helping you with commissioning the text, how to commission a text, what to write to to an author or communicate to an author in order to be on the same page with them about the reason for their invitation. Um, Once you have those essays or texts in hand, a developmental editor will work with you and the author by identifying, for example, where there might be gaps in argument or where there are arguments that could be strengthened. And then once the structural and overall kinks are worked out, then line editors kind of come in and copy editors come in and they work on language, syntax, grammar, and ask questions of you about those things. Another part of the editing process is fact checking, and that's a really important player in your editing process or an editing process. And I it can really change the content. Like finding out one of your facts is wrong can really change the content of your book or of an essay. Um, and then proofreading. Um, I really love proofreaders. It's a very intense skill. And I typically bring in proofreaders once texts are in layout, but all of these smaller errors that can be caught, or errors, or inconsistencies, for example, can be caught only once they are brought through a proofreader. Um, Also, there's things that happen between moving a text from a Word document into a design document, and a proofreader will hopefully help you catch those things. Um, Design. What kind of questions do you want to consider when choosing a designer? The obvious one is the aesthetic and formal sensibility of a designer, and how it matches with your intention. In my experience, one of the most important considerations in this realm is experience. Book design is a really specific kind of work that requires a specific kind of expertise. How much book design experience will you need? Um, um, uh, how much is your book complex? And one thing I just want to say is that we've had experiences where a designer came in who was primarily a poster maker, but they came in and to work on a book that was full of footnotes and full of annotation, or full of captions, and lots of text and text flows and things like that. And it was a real learning curve for that designer. So it is a real important experience is really important. Um, Designers also need to know how books are constructed, the nature and the constraints of, for example, printing and signatures, or how to make the most of a trim size. Books are printed in what are called forms or sheets of multiple pages that are then folded, sewn, and cut and trimmed. So it can be highly inefficient and costly to use a trim size that requires a lot of paper being disposed of. We don't want to do that. It's a good idea also to ask your designer about their process. Some designers really want to collaborate with artists. Others would rather interpret your work and find a book's form mostly on their own, or at least partially on their own. So it's really important to establish a process from the outset. Um, if your book design, the text and image relationship might be really interesting to think about with a designer. In this case, this is a book that we made with William Cordova, and he and the designer Julia Farrell from Leftloff in Milan worked closely to a kind of work between the quotations that he had compiled alongside the images of his work, and installation views and sculptures and um, flat works. So um, then let's see, sorry. This is a book based on a performance by Alex DeCorta, which was a revisioning of a happening by Alan Capro from the 1960s. So the interplay between the historical record on Capro's performance and Alex's revision was really important to draw out visually. So there are multiple registers on which both text and image functions. First, the historically scholarly background, which was through an essay, and the images and scripts that um, were in the archive, the Capro archive at the Getty. Second, the documentation of Alex's performance, which we really wanted to come alive in the book. These were combined with Alex's script, and fragments of memories of the performers as after the fact. Um, so, and then there were of reflections. I would say, by various authors that used as their images artifacts from the performance. Here's Tiffany Malakuti's studio. She worked with Lady Churchman on his book. It was a sequence of plates that was to appear in a survey book published with CCS Bard. Um, when we begin a design process, the first question is almost always, do you have a model? Do you see this as following a standard exhibition catalog layout with a plate section and essay section? Or should it feel like a children's book, maybe, or an encyclopedia or an atlas? It's really a great way for us, we've found, to start a conversation with a designer and an artist. And it acknowledges that books have histories. Here's a couple examples of this. Um, Ulrika Muller and her project, Her Story Inventory, looked to research publications Angry Women book from the 1980s, and we appropriated some of the decorative elements of this book, but also its trim size and various elements, structural elements from Angry Women for that project. Um, this is Moira Davies' Burn the Diary. And the designer Philippe Tack brought Moira's practice really in a direct collision with the history of a book. He proposed that it be novel-like, small enough to hold in your hand, to carry around, like the people in Moira's photograph. Here you see it reading Jean Genet on the subway, which Genet and was a theme of Moira's text in the book. He noticed that if the pages were any bigger than this small trim size, the text would become too much like an image. And so the font is recognizable as that of the French Gallimard publishing house. And he based the other elements of the design on an old-fashioned book form called the image or text, which treats images separately from the text. So a softer, warmer paper we used for the reading section. It's soft. It's designed to make reading easier on your eyes. And also, it's on an uncoated paper, which absorbs the ink and softens the edges of the text, also to make reading easier. Moira's photographs, on the other hand, are printed on a white glossy paper, and that keeps them really sharp and the color really clean. The ink sits on top of a glossy coated paper, and it keeps the integrity of the image quality better. Um, so production quality, how important is that to you? You should let your designer know right away what your production line items are, i.e. printing and binding, and color correction and things like that. You don't want them to design a 300-page book with thousands of color images if you only have $10,000 in your printing budget. So how important is production quality to your project? Uh, you might consider how many images you have, what kind of images those are, and do they need to be very high quality? Sometimes they don't. Do you want really precise color matching? Sometimes you do. Sometimes you don't. Um, Do you need a printer that specializes in high quality image printing and has the capacity to obtain the high quality papers that you want? Um, Sometimes that's not important, but paper will cost, like I said, paper costs not only affects not only cost, but also how your book is read. Um, Printing full color books with substantial print runs. And when I say substantial in an art context, I mean uh, it's not like a trade publisher. It's usually ours runs go from 1,000 copies to around our highest run might be around 5,000. Um, so, but it's very expensive to print art books in the United States. Super expensive, and cheaper in Europe and Asia, for example. So publishers and designers often turn to international printers. But of course, you have to keep in mind that shipping is also expensive and takes time, and there are risks involved in that. Think of pandemic times, for example, when when travel wasn't a part of it, and so you didn't want to go to you wouldn't be able to go on press checks if that's important. Um, and shipping was so disrupted at that time. Now on our horizon, we have tariffs. So we'll see how that plays out with books. At the moment, books are not subject to tariffs coming in. So, but that could easily change if there's reciprocal tariffs. Then that will change for sure. Um, that's just my little fun production line slide, but this this is an example of embossing and stamping a hardcover book. So there's many different varieties of bindings to consider, and I'm sure that there will be other speakers to speak to that too. Some bindings open very flat, lay very flat. So if you have a lot of images that spread across a spread of a book, then that might be really important. Your lay flat. Um, those might be, for example, Audubon or Swiss bindings. You might want to consider, for example, a rounded spine if you want a more literary reference, for example. Um, One note on binding, some publishers or distributors want to have a spine. So this became an issue with a group of chapbooks I mentioned that we made with Big Dance Theater, who invited choreographers to write their own versions of dance history. Um, so it was important for Annie B. Parson and Tommy D. Franz that the histories were individual and weren't compiled into a single volume. After discussing the book with various publishers and distributors, um, we ended up working with Wesleyan University Press, not only because they publish a lot of performance related books, but also they're not afraid of no spines as they publish Saddle Stitch, poetry chapbooks, for example. They work with a lot of poets. So if you really want to nerd out on the complexities of printing, you should grab a copy of Small Editions' amazing book, Paper and Ink, written by Isabel Chang. I just got a copy of it and I'm learning so much from it. Even now I learn. Um, let's see. How many cop oops. How many copies of your book will be printed? We work closely with our reps at DAP to provide them with the background and information on each of our titles, making deadlines and catalog to figure out our print runs. And sometimes determining the number of copies is tricky. We've printed too many on some books and too few on others, and both are really upsetting. Publishers work with distributors to get their books into bookstores. For example, we have a distribution agreement with DAP with the caveat that some of our books are co-published with others and that provide distribution. And we work with the artist to identify ways to amplify a book, often by doing events, doing multiple launches for a book or events to try to reach different audiences. Um, what I always ask is, this question. Whose bookshelf will your book sit on, and what will be around it? Um, I like to use the example of Ulrika Muller's as she envisioned her book, her story inventory. She saw it as sitting on the shelves at the Lesbian Her Story archives in Brooklyn from the very start of the project, because that's where the idea for it sprang, and there's such a great library there, and it does indeed now sit on those shelves. So I think I'm ready for questions.
Thank you so much. I am indeed ready to offer you some questions. Thank you so much for that presentation. We have a lot of them. People were so excited for your presentation. So I'm just going to be picking a couple folks and we'll do our best to kind of circle back to some of the others. Um, but the first one is from Francis. Um, and Francis asks, with an art book, is it typical to find a publisher without a completed manuscript?
Um, so for us, I can speak for us. I think that it's different for different publishers, but for us, a completed manuscript, no. But we because like I said, we're very editorially driven. We do work really for long periods and intense periods with writers and artists on texts that accompany their work. So, no, not necessarily a full manuscript, but certainly a direction. We have had conversations with artists, like I said, Patty Chang, who came to us with just many, many manuscripts, actually, and wanted to figure out with her what what the book could be. So. It depends for us, but a really strong, it would be important. We've also had conversations with artists where they hadn't really fully thought through their prices, but and they wanted a dialogue with us to find that. So it varies, but some sense is good. Some kind of proposal at least is good, and I guess it depends on what the project is.
Thank you for that. Another question we have from Josephine has to do with finding an editor. This is kind of open. What do you have suggestions about how does one go about finding an editor and finding the right fit? And where, when in the process, can a relationship with a conceptual editor be the most useful?
Well, that's a tough question, and I think that sometimes a conceptual editor it can come through just conversations with curators or conversations with even with publisher. A lot of the editing stages actually Barbara and I work on including conceptual editing. So, but sometimes it's important to get more expertise in your subject area. So perhaps you need that expertise in sort of a thematic way in order to, whether through a historian, for example, um, to think through that project with you, or your manuscript with you, or even the construction of your book. So that is one thing. So the people around you, the people that you're doing your research with, for example, if you have one. Um, the other artists maybe might help in helping you through that conceptual period. Um, as far as line editing and copy editing and structural editing, a publisher will often bring that. For certainly in our case, we bring those editors in, and I do a lot of that myself. So it depends. It depends on who your publisher is, but that can happen once you have a publisher on board, because they're going to have also very specific style guides that they're following, and expectations from an editing process generally. Um, Certainly, I can say that from our side, but I think that that is true for most publishers, actually. So it's through that avenue that you find the editors that are going to really work directly with your text. Um, there's also things like the College Art Association has an associated group called the Art Editors. I think it's Association of Art Editors. So there are uh, professional groups that of editors that you can rely on or turn to. Um, that's another opportunity.
Um, Thank you. We have a couple of sort of cluster of questions about budget. Regarding sort of support from galleries, could you elaborate on how much they contribute? Would they cover all the production costs? And what do they expect in return? And as sort of an extension, is it possible to let us know what a typical budget range for the art books you publish, for example, transmissions? And would it be possible to give examples of fees for some of the different roles, editors, designers, writers, artist fees, etc.?
That can really vary. Yeah, it can really vary. Uh, for transmissions, I can't recall exactly. But I would say um, our budgets kind of range usually. We have a lot of images, we have a lot of permissions, so that it really adds up. They usually range starting around 40,000, all the way up to 150. It really depends. And it's so many factors go into this. Um, if you need a big print run, that's going to be huge. If you have many artists or authors, that's going to be a huge part of the budget that gets eaten. And in terms of um, commercial galleries, no, I have not encountered a situation in which the gallery has contributed the entire budget. Maybe for smaller projects they would, not in my experience. And typically it really range. It's got a really big range, maybe $5,000 to $10,000, perhaps. Um, and a big one thing I should say is that bringing on multiple collaborators from our point of view is a great thing in terms of distributors or co-publishers or other not-for-profits that might find a way into your project. For example, Big Dance Theater is a not-for-profit organization. Annie B. Parson, who is the choreographer at Big Dance, she was able to raise a lot of money for our dance histories books through Big Dance Theater and the dance community. So that is that was one way. And also we were able to co-publish our book with Wesleyan University Press, and Wesleyan bought a number of copies for distribution directly from us as a pre-sale. So it really directly helped to fund that book. Um, so, it's really building a way of funding your book is through a lot of different avenues and a lot of different ideas. And there's just so many multiple ways of doing that and multiple funders for each project, actually. So it's a cobbling of resources, I would say.
Um,
Helps.
I think it does. I mean, I think we're all always trying to sort of like build this sort of singular picture, and the answer is so often there's many, many pictures, but this is a
Yeah.
helpful way to kind of um, uh, a helpful way to kind of think our way through. Even though we're a minute or two past. I want to just pose this last question because I think it's great. It's from Miss Mira, who asks, who also runs a small press that's do and small business and wants to know what has allowed Dancing Fox to sustain and thrive. What is success for y'all? Mhm.
Oh, success is having fun making a book. That's a success. Really, that's why we do it. Because we love making books, and it's a really tough thing to do. So uh, every step of the way can be very difficult and bring new surprises. But we do it for the fun of it, and we love working with artists, and we love working with curators, and we love working with ideas and writers. And so that's what success is for us. It's not going to be a money like big. It's not big money. Let's just say that it's never going to be big money for an art publisher, a small art publisher like us. But what sustains us financially is doing things very leanly if we possibly can. There's really just two of us in the office, so with some assistants here and there, and we because we really outsource things like design, and so that we can personalize each project, make it really flexible for each artist that we're working with. Our model, uh, we keep our sort of operational expenses as low as we can. And we do build in fees for editorial work, for even for our own editorial work, um, because the sales of the books really isn't going to pay pay for those kind of operational or typical expenses for publishers.
Let's stop us there. Thank you so much for your expertise and time. We didn't get to all of our questions, but hopefully we can bring them into further sessions or continue conversation about this. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.